Welcome, YouTubers. It's Coach Larry. Hope everything is well. Today I'm going to talk about the health segment. I'm going to talk about some of the best ways to improve health. Just a disclaimer, I am a life and health and business coach. I am not a doctor or a nutritionist. However, what I'm going to talk about are things that have worked for me, people I've coached, and also the advice of medical professionals I follow on YouTube, as well as other doctors and health professionals that I consult with in my area. Some of the ones on YouTube are people like Dr. Ken Berry, Annette Bosworth, uh, and a few others. I will have a link later on in the show notes so that you can check out their podcasts as well. I also share a lot of their views on Facebook. And of course, I also put this on Facebook as well so that more people can, get the benefit of my knowledge and the knowledge of others that I try to pass down. Anyway, what is this all about? Well, Dr. Berry talks about the proper human diet, which a lot of experts are starting to see is a proper human diet, i.e., cutting away carbs, replacing it with the right kinds of fat, as well as moderate protein, and there's also a discrepancy as to the necessity for fiber. I believe the fiber is important because it does clean the system, and the microbiome also can eat away at the fiber, whereas the rest of the digestive tract cannot. And there are certain foods that are on the list of the wrong foods, I should say. But in any event, we'll start with some of the things that we shouldn't have. Obviously, high carb foods, processed foods that you could buy in supermarket or convenience stores that are prepackaged with a lot of chemicals in it. There are lots of, for example, Hostess and Drake's and some of the others, even Intimates. They taste great, but there's a lot of sugar, and there's also other preservatives and whatnot that are very inflammatory. They do that obviously to keep the cost down, and of course to make them addictive, so you buy more and eat more of them. No one has ever gotten thin from eating Twinkies. On the other hand, the good stuff, i.e., steaks, any kind of meat, poultry, fish, they don't have the same kind of sweet taste, but they are nutrient dense. I grew up hating liver, for example. And liver, as well as cod liver oil, anything organ meats, is the most nutrient dense food there is. Why? It's got everything. And it makes sense because even in our own bodies, our livers do a lot of the processing of various nutrients, including ways of burning fat. Problem is that when you eat a normal carb-based diet, where you have pastas, and potatoes. I'll have to even include corn, even though it's fibrous to the point where it comes out looking the same way it did when it went in. Corn's not really the best food for you. But a lot of people eat it, a lot of people like it. Some of it's even very sweet. Again, the sugar, any starch turns to sugar and it boosts up the glucose. And then, of course, insulin is called into play and it goes to shove everything into the cells. Problem is that why is that a problem? Well, we need insulin, definitely. And a type 1 diabetic does not produce insulin or does not produce sufficient insulin. And as a result, has to take exogenous insulin in order to stay alive. Whereas a type 2 diabetic is so because of diet, not so much heredity, but what he or she eats. I have been diagnosed for the past decade or so with type 2 diabetes. And of course, only when I went to the hospital for another issue a number of years ago, they would give me exogenous insulin when my blood sugar went up. But I'm type 2 diabetic. And that's where the insulin that I produce, which is a lot, is being thwarted by the cells. You see, with type 2, the cells become resistant to the insulin because there's too much sugar being shoved in. Imagine, and there's lots of metaphors to this, but imagine you move into a neighborhood and like 10 people from the neighborhood give you a housewarming gift of chocolate cake, and you love chocolate cake. Okay, you accepted the gift, you say thank you. But imagine 100 people come in to do it every hour for the next week. Pretty soon, you're going to say, I can't accept more chocolate cake. It's the house, I don't have room for my furniture. The same thing is happening with insulin resistance. Insulin is putting more and more sugar into the cells, and it's being overrun. So what do they do? So what happens? Pancreas produces more insulin, try to force more into the cells, and then, but it has to go somewhere. So they put it in cells that are around the liver, the kidneys, the pancreas, and pretty soon other complications happen. You get neuropathy, which can lead to, heaven forbid, amputation. Kidney failure, which leads to things like dialysis and the need possibly for a new kidney. And of course, the liver also suffers, and blindness comes from it. In fact, an extended member of my family had basically passed away a number of years ago to complications due to his diabetes. He had gotten blind. I'm sure he had some neuropathy in his limbs, and he just didn't change his diet or do anything to prevent this from happening. And he's unfortunately now deceased. Someone else that I knew a few years ago passed away. He was from my synagogue. I couldn't find. He was away for like 3 years. I didn't realize that he had divorced his wife and moved out and went and went elsewhere. Problem was that during that 3 year period, he had lost his leg due to his diabetic problems. He also had heart. He also had a lot of heart issues, respiratory issues, and eventually he passed away. Oddly enough, his wife died the same day, even though they were living in two separate places. They went to the same funeral home, but two separate cemeteries. Kind of morbid, but this is what happens when you are not careful with your diet, or you follow the standard American diet where you're laying on things like pasta, potatoes, uh, lots of breads, cakes, candies, even legumes. You got to be careful with. That's like those beans. Anyway, so it's all right. So how do we solve this problem? Well, Dr. Jason Fung, who has his own his own channel, and he was the first one that introduced me to this concept called intermittent fasting. And I had attempted to do that. If you look at my Facebook profile, Larry J. Lazar, you will see my background picture has a picture of me back in like 2001, where I was even much, much heavier than I am now. That was when and it's a graduation picture because I took some courses in computers at DeVry, but that was a long time ago. Do I do any computer work now? Not on that level. Anyway, but when I did intermittent fasting, all of a sudden I saw my weight coming down because I started off doing 16-8. In other words, 16 hours of fasting, 4 hours before bed, 4 hours after bedtime, and then I had an 8 hour eating window, and I had to watch what I eat, but my weight started coming down. That's a good thing. And then and then I learned about the ketogenic diet, and I says, well, if carbs are the problem, get rid of the carbs. And I started following not only Jason Fung, but Dr. Ken Berry, and also a few others, Dr. Eric Berg, who also has a very informative channel, as well as Annette Bosworth, who actually has a course in keto as well. There's a number of experts out there that promote this, and it's helped hundreds of people, hundreds if not thousands of people throughout the country, maybe even hundreds of thousands throughout the world. Why? Well, a little history. Back in 1969, there was a so-called scientist by the name of Ancel Keys who went to like 24 to 28 countries to study their eating patterns and see what they. And unfortunately, he had his own hypothesis, and so he saw what they did, and then he knocked away like all but 7 countries from his study. And in those 7 countries, he deduced, without taking anything else into account, that fat was bad, and that you needed to avoid any kind of saturated fats, and try to take fat out of your diet almost completely, and do carbs, some protein, lots of fruits, lots of vegetables, but certainly base it on, but with a carb-based diet. From 1970 till today, back then, the idea of type 2 diabetes or adult onset diabetes was practically unheard of. Childhood diabetes almost didn't exist except for the type 1. Unfortunately, since the study with Ansel Keys came out, childhood obesity skyrocketed, as did pre-diabetes, diabetes, and of course, everything that's connected with it. Heart disease, all these things were connected to our diet and lifestyle related. Now, why do I say it's diet and lifestyle related? Well, a lot of people, when they follow a stricter regimen, taking carbs out of their diet and going on a strict keto, and there's various forms of ketogenics, which is of the ketogenic diet. It goes from just low carb, where it's 50 grams of carbs a day or less, down to all the way to a strict carnivore diet where you only eat animal products. Dr. Berry talks about beef, butter, bacon, and eggs, and of course anything in between. Add in, of course, organ meats, which will more than enhance your health, and I'm talking liver, kidney, brain, spleen. Now, these, a lot of organ meats are not as readily available because it's not popular to sell. Another problem that came from that study is that instead that we used to cook with things like butter, lard, and chicken fat and tallow, all these things, and then that study and they say that these are bad for you, bad for your heart, and so they created these vegetable and seed oils, which is nothing more than industrialized oils that have no vegetables or seeds in them, and they were converted into something that was put into our food sources. These are totally inflammatory, have the wrong types of fats in them, and they have contributed greatly to a lot of the problems we face today. I always say that here in America, we are probably the most medically advanced in the way of drugs, medicines, and surgeries. Yet we lead the world in more and more types of illnesses than are even found in third world countries. It's amazing. The greater progress we have, the sicker we become. And it's not just diet either. Our technologies, for example, make us more sedentary. We take for granted the fact that we can get things online. We don't even have to go to the store anymore to buy what we need. But many of our jobs, a lot of times, are in office, except for those that do physical work, which is also commendable. But a lot of people work in office jobs where they're sitting at a desk all day in front of a computer, like I am right now, and they don't really move around very much. As a result, since they're not moving, they're not exercising, and their muscles tend to atrophy. People join gyms, they pay their membership, and they don't attend. Even if you do something as simple as walking a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles a day, it gives you the exercise. Not so much to lose weight, because exercise doesn't really contribute much to weight loss, because a lot of times people work out and do, and then they eat more, supposedly, which brings on more of the calories that they were burning, and it really doesn't contribute much to the weight loss. But if you take, but if you have time restricted eating, and sometimes, and I've been known to do 24 and 36 and 48-hour fasts from time to time. And what's good about that is that, and I'm not talking just abstain from everything. Drink plenty of water, plenty of liquids with, with the essential salts. And there's reasons that salt is important. I mean, we say salt. They say salt's going to increase your blood pressure. Salt does not have that big an effect on blood pressure, and it's a necessary nutrient. There was an episode on MASH where they had this disease that a lot of the soldiers were getting, and they were dying. And Colonel Potter told the medical staff that the Army had a directive, no IV saline. Yet these patients were peeing out salt by the buckets, and without enough salt in the body dies. So they did an experiment that was very risky. A little bit of salt in the IV, not a full saline solution. And it actually worked, and it saved the patient's lives. So we do need salt, and a lot of times I will suck on a salt crystal, or if I'm fasting, I will put in. Keto Chow has some drops of fasting solution, which is mostly salt with a little magnesium and I think some potassium too. It's important to replenish your minerals, replenish your electrolytes. Very important. Because a lot of times when you have this, when you go on a special ketogenic diet and you do intermittent fasting, what happens is the insulin level drop, the blood sugar drops to hopefully normal levels over time. Insulin drops, and there's something called, and when you're in a fasted state, the liver is producing something called ketones, where you're in a state of ketosis, and that actually helps to burn away the excess fat that's in your body, around your vital organs, your liver, your kidneys, and it also creates something called autophagy. When you're fasting for a period of time, it creates something called autophagy. And there was a Japanese scientist, I forget his name, who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of autophagy and his work on that. And autophagy is basically what it is it's self-eating. Whether you're eating or you're not eating. When you're ingesting food, yes, you're eating, and you're bringing in the nutrients from outside, and the pancreas is going to stimulate the insulin, because there is going to be some spikes in your blood sugar because everything has some sugar in it. On the other hand, if when you're fasting and you're in a ketotic state, the body is still eating. It's, instead of feeding off of the food that you just brought in, it'll feed off of and going after the sugar. If it has less sugar to go after, then it goes into the reserves and burns and releases the fat in the cells, and that's where your energy comes from there. Which is better? Well, body actually prefers to do from stored fat, and that makes sense. It's what our primordial ancestors did. Not only that, but look if you look into the if you look into these kinds of ideas, if you look into what's really right for the human body, you'll notice that whenever, back in the 50s and 60s, maybe early 70s, before they everybody became fat phobic, there was people were much healthier, people were much skinnier. Look at old movies, even with the extras and everybody else, and versus the movies of today, you'll find that most people today are have much more weight on them, on their bodies, than they did 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, because back then the nutritional, because they were eating better diets. Now, I'm not going to get into why why animal products are better in many cases, but they just are. What I would, like I say, I do this because, as I said, I myself have not only dropped 40, 50 pounds in like a 6 month period, but I also was able to reverse my type 2 diabetes and bring my blood pressure down. Now, of course, it's a lot of times if I relapse and go into some of the, eat some of the bad stuff, I get a spike up for a little while, but I said, whoa, I gotta, I gotta, I gotta get back on track. Blood sugar goes down, blood pressure goes down because I'm not taxing. Now, as far as exercise is concerned, we all need to do some form of exercise, not for weight loss, but just for overall health. And it does help to strengthen the metabolism because you are strengthening muscles. And I don't look at weight by itself. I mean, the numbers on the scale just say how much you weigh. It doesn't say how much of that weight is one thing versus another. You could be like 10, 15 pounds overweight according to the quote unquote glycemic index, or the BMI parameters. Yet that excess weight could be muscle and not necessarily fat. And that's a good thing because that means that you have more muscle around and you're burning more fat. Now, there are certain products that I like to promote, and that's some of the things that I'm going to go into are in the show notes. If you like what you see, and as Dr. Barry says, please press the subscribe button. And anytime I get an idea, whether it be in my case, whether it be on health and nutrition, or whether it be in things like business, or even a spiritual thing. When I get subscribe to my channel, and I'll be able to, and when I'll have a Patreon link on there very soon. I'm developing that now. In the meantime, and I'm also going to have other experts coming on as my guests, or I might even guest spot on other podcasts as well. So, in the meantime, stay healthy, improve your health, and remember, you are infinitely powerful. If you look in the show notes, it also talks a little bit about what my coaching system a little bit, where you have to just read over that, where you have to find your direction. Uh, they, well, excuse me. Get your, get your direction. Get it. Strategize your actions. Optimize your environment, and and basically control your inner game. Most of us know what to do. We don't always do what we know. And a lot of times it's because of our inner game, which says, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. I always say, especially, you know, I even tell my wife, no such thing as can't. You just have to believe you can and go for it. You never know if you can do something until you try it. In my case, I didn't think I could reverse my type 2 diabetes. But by finding sources, and by changing, where I eat very, very little carbs, good amount of protein, and substitute fat for those carbs. And of course, intermittent fasting, I was able to reverse my diabetes, bring my weight, bring my fat levels down, and be able to increase my energy. In fact, recently, I've actually been able to take. I also suffered from obstructive sleep apnea, and so I've been utilizing that. And a lot of times when I'm in a fasted state, I'm more awake than I am when after I've eaten something, because a lot of times the body does a lot of work in digesting food. Does that mean I don't eat at all? Of course not. That's ridiculous. We all have to eat, but we don't always have to fast we don't always have to feast and snack every 2 hours. And that's what's causing a big problem today. We get we eat 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then we throw snacks in between those meals. No wonder we're all overweight. But no wonder there's obesity and diabetes that is running rampant. What you need to do is you need to curb it, and best of all, you need to curb it, and you need to not only cut back on your snacks. Pretty soon, I know people that go on 1 meal a day. Oh man, their caloric intake is less, but their nutritional intake is phenomenal, because they only eat nutrient dense foods, and that is like ideal. Not for everybody, and as I said, I'm not a doctor. I just know what has worked for myself, some of my clients, and of course others that I've spoken to in this arena. Have a good week. Stay powerful, and you might see me later on in the week with another good idea. If not, then next Sunday will be another topic. Remember, unleash your powerful self, and you'll never know the heights you can hit.